Listen, for years, Tekken fans begged for literally one character, Final Fantasy VII's Tifa Lockhart. So, when she was finally announced as a fighting game guest at Summer Game Fest 2026, it completely broke the internet. But she wasn't coming to Tekken, she was going to Street Fighter 6. Why on earth did Bandai Namco settle for Clive instead? And did this multi-million-dollar licensing drama actually cause the legendary creator of Tekken to just up and quit? Stick around, because I promise you, this isn't just another AI slop explainer. This is a highly informative, educational, and honestly pretty entertaining explainer on the wild, wild business of video game crossovers. Oh, and before we dive into all of the drama, hit that like button real quick for me. Okay, let's just dive right into this because this is a massive paradox that absolutely fractured the fighting game community. Historically, Tekken has had a phenomenal relationship with Square Enix, right? We saw Noctis in Tekken 7, and fans widely assumed Tifa was an absolute lock for Tekken 8, especially given her hand-to-hand combat style. It just made sense. But the reality of modern gaming is that guest characters aren't just fun novelties anymore. They are the result of intense corporate maneuvering. Tifa didn't just casually choose Street Fighter. She was the ultimate prize in a high-stakes battle of corporate economics and behind-the-scenes developer networks. To really wrap our heads around the magnitude of this, we've got to look at the board. On one side, you have Capcom's massive roster win, securing Tifa for Street Fighter 6's Year 4 DLC, alongside new characters like Yasmin, Arjun, and Bosch, is a monumental achievement. It's huge. But on the other side, Bandai Namco settled for Clive Rosefield from Final Fantasy XVI. Now, don't get me wrong, Clive is a fantastic character, but to the hardcore fanbase who had been actively campaigning for Tifa for years, it felt like a really jarring compromise. And this right here sets up our core conflict. How exactly did Capcom pull off the heist of the decade, while Bandai Namco was left dealing with all this fierce community backlash?
Chapter 1. Capcom's 3 Years Secret Plan.
To answer how this happened, we have to rewind the timeline a bit. Tifa's reveal didn't just happen overnight. In fact, this collaboration was a highly calculated business development initiative that kicked off around the time Street Fighter 6 launched in mid-2023. Capcom wasn't just fishing for any random guest character. They wanted a cultural icon who could perfectly align with their long-term vision for the game's lifecycle. Now, what's really fascinating is exactly how this deal got started. It wasn't some cold, boring corporate email. Street Fighter director Takayuki Nakayama bypassed a ton of corporate friction by basically utilizing a mutual friend who works at Square Enix, and just so happened to be a massive Street Fighter fan. This personal connection pried the door open to pitch the collaboration. And since the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy was incredibly active at the time, Tifa organically emerged as the optimal choice. But it wasn't a free-for-all. Every single design choice had to go through rigorous approvals, ultimately needing the green light from Final Fantasy VII's legendary lead character designer himself, Tetsuya Nomura. The timeline here brilliantly illustrates the grueling pipeline required to respectfully adapt a high-profile guest character today. Get this, we're talking about 6 whole months just for negotiations and contract drafting. Then a massive 18 months of gameplay prototyping, balancing, and meticulously researching over a decade of source material. And that was followed by 3 months of strict aesthetic approvals and look development to ensure her character model fit the RE engine perfectly without losing her iconic look. This is exactly why Capcom has been very clear that Tifa does not signal a floodgate of random guest characters. The process is simply way too resource-intensive. See, Capcom really wanted to prove they were doing this right. They didn't just paste her into the game and call it a day. Everything from her design to her movement was rebuilt completely from the ground up as Tifa the Street Fighter. She uses her signature Zanganryu martial arts, but Capcom also went ahead and designed a completely bespoke, materia-induced gameplay system specifically for her. They poured immense technical effort into making her feel totally authentic to Final Fantasy while still keeping her perfectly balanced within the Street Fighter ecosystem. Honestly, it's a masterclass in IP integration. Actually, before we move on to the crazy fallout over on the Bandai Namco side, I gotta hear from you guys. Are you Team Street Fighter, completely thrilled about Tifa's meticulous integration, or are you Team Tekken, defending Clive and his iconic abilities? Drop a comment down below right now and let me know where you stand on this crossover war. Chapter 2, Why Tekken Settled for Clive. All right, let's shift gears to Bandai Namco's side of the equation. Because while Street Fighter fans were popping champagne, a huge chunk of the Tekken community felt utterly betrayed. Fans have been pointing out for literal years that a hand-to-hand brawler like Tifa absolutely belongs in a 3D fighter like Tekken, especially since she technically has roots in the 1998 3D fighting game Air Guys, which Namco published. The frustration reached such a boiling point that when the news broke, the internet was just flooded with quotes like this super salty Reddit gem: Harada quit Tekken because he couldn't get Tifa. Now, obviously, that specific quote was just a joke on the subreddit, but it completely hit the nail on the head regarding the intense community backlash. People were genuinely trying to make sense of how their most heavily requested martial artist slipped right through their fingers and straight into the hands of their biggest competitor. So here is the crucial points. Personal developer networks completely dictate modern gaming IPs. Just like Capcom utilized a mutual friend, Bandai Namco leaned heavily on their own connections. Tekken series producer Katsuhiro Harada happens to have a very close personal friendship with Naoki Yoshida, better known as Yoshi P, who is the producer of Final Fantasy XVI. This friendship provided a direct, super smooth communication channel to secure Clive. Conversely, Harada lacked a similar tight-knit relationship with Tetsuya Nomura and the Final Fantasy VII creative team, which created a massive structural barrier to ever getting Tifa. And then, of course, there's the harsh reality of licensing fees. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, doesn't Bandai Namco handle the physical distribution of Square Enix games in Europe? Well, yeah, they do. But when it comes to digital intellectual property, the industry is cutthroat. Final Fantasy VII is Square Enix's golden goose. Tifa is a premium legacy asset, and Square demands exceptionally high licensing fees for her. Despite their physical distribution partnership, Bandai Namco received absolutely a $0 discount for Tifa. No breaks whatsoever. Tekken 8 was operating under strict budget caps, and management simply couldn't or wouldn't meet those premium financial terms. Which brings us to exactly why Clive was the ultimate choice. Guys, this was a corporate mandate. Guest characters today are highly lucrative multi-million-dollar interactive advertisements. When the Tekken 8 deal was happening, Final Fantasy XVI was Square's brand new mainline game, and they desperately needed to aggressively promote it. Tifa is already a globally recognized icon, right? She doesn't really need the extra exposure, but Clive did. So Square Enix offered Clive as a cheaper, cross-promotional tool to drive interest in their new game, which effectively took Tifa completely off the table for Bandai Namco. But here is where the story takes a really fascinating turn, because despite all that vocal fan outrage and the loud complaints that a sword-wielding, magic-casting character had absolutely no business being in Tekken, the hard data tells a totally different story. Quantitative analysis of Tekken 8's ranked modes reveals that Clive actually became the most popular guest character in Tekken ranked history. It's wild. He sits comfortably at number 2 overall, right behind King, completely eclipsing previous heavy hitters like Negan and Noctis. So, from a purely engagement-driven business perspective, Bandai Namco's so-called compromise was actually a massive commercial success. Chapter 3: The Fallout and Harada's Exit. Now let's see how all this builds into some very real-world industry consequences. Because even though Clive was a statistical hit, the internal friction over monetization disputes, budget restrictions, and the community's relentless demands created a highly stressful environment between the development team and corporate management over at Bandai Namco. The internal consequences were devastating. In December 2024, Clive releases. Exactly 1 year later, in December 2025, Katsuhiro Harada absolutely shocks the industry by announcing his departure from Bandai Namco after 31 years, leaving to go lead a new studio for SNK. Shortly after that, in mid-2026, game director Koihe Ikeda also leaves. This created a massive, gaping leadership vacuum at Bandai Namco, and right as they are actively scrambling to deal with this internal disruption, Capcom drops the absolute hammer in June 2026, revealing Tifa for Street Fighter VI. I mean, this is easily one of the most fascinating corporate dramas we've seen in recent gaming history. If you are finding this breakdown valuable, please go ahead and share this explainer right now with a friend who plays fighting games, because the more people understand the actual business behind these decisions, the better discussions we can have as a community. So let's summarize the overarching political economy here. You essentially have two drastically different corporate strategies going head-to-head. Capcom utilized a 3-year pipeline to secure a massive cultural icon, specifically targeting a younger demographic to reinforce a planned 10-year life cycle for Street Fighter VI. Bandai Namco, on the flip side, was heavily restricted by budget caps and opted for a cross-promotional strategy that successfully drove immediate launch-year sales with Clive, relying heavily on those existing executive relationships. Both strategies worked out financially, but they yielded vastly different community sentiments. Ultimately, this whole saga proves one undeniable truth. The days of cheap, easy crossovers made just for a little fan service, yeah, those are dead and buried. Today, fighting game crossovers are highly guarded, multi-million-dollar interactive ads. Every single character inclusion is a deeply calculated negotiation, balancing licensing fees, brand synergy, and developer relationships. Which leaves us with this massive question to chew on. How will this escalating licensing war shape the future of gaming? As these deals become more complex and way more expensive, who will the next big guest characters even be? And what unexpected corporate alliances will make them happen? If you want to keep learning about the hidden business of the gaming industry, hit that subscribe button right now and click the next explainer on your screen to keep diving deep with me. Thanks so much for watching.